You know, I'll be honest, I'm a big fan of minivans, but not the minivans of nowadays that you see all the time. I love the vans of the 80s, 90s, and the 2000s. And today, before we all get blown away, we have the chance to take a walk down memory lane and look at a memorable but also forgettable minivan of the 90s, the Toyota Previa. Toyota has actually been making vans for well longer than you think. Not just the Siennas of the late 90s and the early 2000s. They actually started making vans all the way in the 1960s when they started the Hiace line, which is now its own van in itself. The Hiace further progressed into the Toyota van of the 1980s. You hardly see them anymore, but I'd really love to get my hands on one of those. But after the Toyota van, Toyota introduced the Previa in 1990. The Previa was sold from the 1991 model year all the way to 1997, and it competed with other 90s minivans like the Ford Aerostar and Windstar at the time, the Dodge Caravan and Chrysler Town & Country, and a few others, but this was very distinctive compared to all those traditional looking vans. Although the Previa was more popular than the van it replaced, it still didn't come close to the Ford vans and Dodge vans of the time because they were all cheaper, more efficient, and also more powerful. Surprisingly, the Previa was quite expensive back in the day. These unfortunately succumbed to poor IIHS crash test ratings, and because of that, and also the Previa's diminishing sales as we got closer to 2000, it was replaced in 1998 with the all-new front-wheel drive Camry-based Toyota Sienna. So this Previa in particular belongs to my friend Julian. It's a 1993 Previa DX, which stood for Deluxe, and it's in Toyota's OEM Burgundy Pearl. It's a very nice looking color, and it makes this egg look a little bit less like an egg, but a more classy egg. Now the DX trim was the base for the Previa, and the only options that this DX has on top are power windows and mirrors for $380. You could actually choose a gaggle of options for your Previa in 1993, like dual moonroofs, a fridge, and a bunch of other things that really make this turn into a spaceship. But since this one is a more base DX, it had an MSRP of about $19,000 back in 1993, and in today's money that's about $40,000, the price of a base model Toyota Sienna now. That wind is crazy. Toyota has always been pretty simple when it comes to trims. That's the same thing nowadays, and it was the same back then as well. You could choose between the base DX Previa, or you could choose a luxurious Previa LE. And of course, on both trims, you could stack options onto them as well. But on both trims of the Previa, you could choose between rear-wheel drive or all-wheel drive, automatic or manual, and then in the later years, you could choose naturally aspirated or supercharged. If you wanted the holy grail of the luxurious Toyota van of the 90s, you could get a loaded Previa LE for about $27,000 in 1993, which is about $56,000 today. That's about the price, maybe a little bit less than a brand new Sienna Platinum. That's crazy for this egg. Unlike its main rivals at the time with optional or standard V6 powertrains, the Previa was exclusively a 4-cylinder van, which is kind of what hurt its sales, I would say, at least in the American market. But they did offer a little bit more of a powerful Previa, but this one isn't the powerful one. Now, before we get too far into that, something bizarre about the Previa, thank you Previa, is that the engine is actually not under the hood. It's actually between the two front seats, which makes this a mid-engine rear-wheel drive van. I know that many people have talked about the powertrain layout of this thing, but I still find it pretty cool. Under the hood here though are all of the accessories and fluid reservoirs, like for washer fluid, engine oil, coolant, brake fluid, power steering fluid, even the engine air filter is up here too. You might think that this thing is the engine air filter, but it's actually for the HVAC system. Toyota actually managed to stuff all the accessories like the power steering pump, the AC compressor, under the front of this, away from the engine, because of this interesting design called SADS, Supplemental Auxiliary Drive Shaft System. Bit of a tongue twister, but I find it very interesting because it's just a drive shaft that powers all the things up front. So at this point you know that this is a mid-engine rear-wheel drive van, so you might be pretty eager to know what's powering this thing. But it's not the biggest powerhouse in the world. This is a this isn't, but this is powered by a 2.4 liter inline 4, also known as the 2TZ-FE. In this application, it makes 138 horsepower and 156 pound-feet of torque. Those power figures gave this a 0 to 60 time of about 12 seconds, quoted by MotorWeek. And in terms of MPGs, Toyota rated this at 19 in the city, 20 on the highway, and a combined rating of 20 as well. Pretty decent numbers for something that's pretty big. You could also choose between two transmission options in your Previa. This one has the 4-speed automatic transmission, which was actually optional, but standard was a 5-speed manual. Most of the ones, of course, that you'll see are the automatic ones. But again, you could get all-wheel drive in your Previa, and Toyota called it all-track all-wheel drive. It was a derivative of the systems that you could see in the Camry all-track and also the Celica all-track and the earlier Celica GT4, but the only difference between this system and those other ones is that you cannot manually lock the center differential. But it still has a center diff, but it connects with the viscous coupling that can send power between the front wheels and the rear wheels, 50-50 even split. These are actually pretty capable off-road, despite them not having an actual low-range gearbox, but I have seen a lot of people take their all-wheel drive Previas off-road. By now you have probably observed that this egg is not as small as it appears to be. In pictures, this looks a lot smaller than it is, but in person, this is actually pretty sizable. It measures at 187 inches long, 11 inches longer than a second-generation Toyota 4Runner of this same vintage. Across the pond, actually, Toyota does make two smaller versions of the Previa, but they're called the Estima Lucida and the Estima Emina. They're about 3.5 inches shorter than this Previa and about 4 inches narrower than this Previa as well. And that's mainly due to the tax bracket, because the bigger that your car is, the more you get taxed in Japan. You also had a few options to choose from in terms of wheels for your Previa. Not a lot, so don't get too excited, but on base trims you could get a 14-inch steel wheel, you could also get a 15-inch steel wheel on the LE, and you could also get different designs of 15-inch alloy wheels on your LE as well. But this actually fits pretty well with these period correct 15-inch alloy wheels that match the color very well. I love the red and gold look. Now, one of the main virtues of an egg and a minivan is practicality, and the Previa really does not disappoint. It's actually shockingly impressive. You can see this is a 3-row van, and behind the 3rd row, even though the floor is just as flat as you can see here, there's 33 cubic feet of volume behind the 3rd row seat up. That's really big, bigger than some modern crossovers and even some vans nowadays. But like I said, there's no floor underneath, but that is due to this having a solid rear axle. I was dumbfounded to find that out. The 3rd row also doesn't fold flat like how you may think it does, like a Honda Odyssey or the Town & Countries in the later years. This actually folds like Toyotas of the old days. It folds up and flat. The back folds flat, and then it folds up against the sides of the van, just like the old 4Runners, Land Cruisers, Lexus GXs. This is how they did it. And these seats can also be removed for a little bit more space as well. The 2nd row seats can also fold and come out of the Previa, and that gives you 158 cubic feet of volume. That's really big. That's really big, especially for back in the day.
Headrests come off.
Yeah.
And you can just like throw them under here. There's room. And this seat slides forward.
Yeah. Wow.
And then you can recline those.
And that's
It's a little bit lumpy, but it's a bed.
That's a bed.
Or it's a recliner chair if you want to have two friends in the back.
That's
and
crazy.
drive around like that.
Something else that was pretty impressive about the Previa, and adding on to the fact that this has a solid rear axle, this actually can tow. Toyota rated the Previa to tow 3,500 pounds. Pretty solid. You could tow a little camper or anything you want. This one doesn't have the hitch, but you can tow with your egg. Something I've always found peculiar about these 80s and 90s vans is that a lot of them, I think all of them, only had 3 doors from the beginning. And of course the Previa is one of them. And that's mainly because this door is on the passenger side, and I guess it's easier to not have your kids fall out of the driver's side and, you know, become road pizza or something. But we can now check out the 3rd row. Now, aside from the potential road pizza, because this is a minivan, it has 3 rows. It's actually very spacious back here as well. Because this is a 90s van, this one doesn't have a 3-person middle seat. They actually made this cutout, well, made it only for 2 people to sit up front here, but it makes it easier to get in without having to slide seats or fold seats. This front seat does slide forwards and backwards, but it's pretty far back in its tracks, and I'm 5'9", and I have great legroom. I can fit my feet under this seat. Headroom is great as well because this is shaped like an egg. For all 3 rows, the bottom of the seat is pretty soft and the back is pretty supportive as well. This 3rd row seat also reclines, which is very nice as well. As we hop into the 2nd row of the Previa, things are also nice back, well, up front here, but also back here as well. The seat slides backwards and forwards to provide comfort for all 3 rows of seating. The 2nd row is only for 2 people. The 2nd row seat is actually pretty comfortable as well, but the 3rd row seat is a little bit cushier, a little bit softer than this. It actually is also pretty supportive, and I like that there are armrests for the passenger on this side, and there's, you know, you could put your hand on the window here. There's AC controls up here. There's heat that comes through the front doors. It's actually very interesting how they duct it. Like I said, again, I'm 5'9", and I have great legroom. The seat is a little bit farther than how I sit, but this seat is all the way back, and I have great legroom. I can't really fit my feet under the seat because the engine is right up front here, but I have great footroom too. Headroom is even better than the 3rd row. There's also an ashtray in the back here for your children so they can toke as well. Now, this is one of my favorite seats in the house, the front seat. This is where you can really experience the egg. First of all, this is the key for the Previa. This is a very period correct key. I like that. I had a similar key on my Tacoma as well, but because this has no push button start, no smart key nonsense, you just well, you don't even have to put your foot on the brake. You just put the key in the ignition and turn it, and it starts. And it gets going. But welcome to the interior of the Previa. It's an excellent van in here, and it is quite the experience. Material quality is nice, soft touch materials on the top of the door surprisingly, and even a soft touch armrest, and I love the shape of the dash. In pictures it doesn't swoop as much. In person it's really prominent, and I love it. You really have to sit in one of these and experience it. Also, the amount of glass in here is unreal. I love the visibility. You don't get this in new vans nowadays. But looking at the steering wheel, it's a 4-spoke unit. It does have power steering. The horn works, and it's a little meep meep horn. Live for a little thing it tries. You can also see Toyota's cruise control stock on the wheel itself. If we look behind the wheel though, you can see it has the headlight stock. They are not automatic, but the wipers are not automatic either, but they are intermittent. Behind the wiper stock, you can see the shifter for the 4-speed automatic. I love column shifters. Again, it's something that we really don't get nowadays in vans. I love the commanding feel of a column shift. As we look at the gauges, they're pretty simple. I'm not sure if you could get a tach on higher trims of the Previa. So you only get a speedometer, a coolant gauge, and a fuel gauge. That's really all you need as a van driver. If it was I've driven manual cars without a tachometer as well, so it wouldn't be the end of the world. But at least to my knowledge, is one of the first cars in my brain catalog that has a maintenance minder in it. It'll actually tell you when it's time to change your oil with a little light on the dash. You can reset it with a little button, but you have to push it with a pen. But that's very handy. A maintenance minder in 1993. I also find all the switchgear pretty interesting as well, like where the window controls are. The door locks and the mirror controls are a little bit lower down, but it's nice. We have all these power accoutrements. Interesting, I didn't even know that came off.
And you'd have, if you had a van with premium sound, that's where your speakers would be here. These are 2 4-inch speakers.
Yeah.
And then you'd have speakers by those rear by those rear handles.
Yeah.
And then there'd be a 6x9 sub on the driver's side.
Yeah.
In the back. You can get the premium sound in any of the vans.
Yeah.
I forget what Toyota calls it.
That's sick.
But yeah, you can get that in any of the vans. I've seen them in DXs.
If we look towards the center, the Previa has a single zone climate control. Well, technically it's dual zone because you can send AC or vent air through the top air vents, and then you can send heat through, to the rear passengers through ducts that go through the rear doors. But single zone climate control, very simple, very easy. Classic Toyota, nothing's gonna break in here, very easy. Underneath that, this has an aftermarket head unit in it, but the factory head unit was a double din. You could get a CD player in some higher trims of the Previa or with higher options. Underneath that are 2 cup holders, which in every Previa, they are broken. It's funny, I've watched a bunch of Previa videos recently and they're all broken. It's funny, but underneath that, there's a cigarette lighter that you could have, your parents could smoke. If you're smoking in the back, the parents can smoke too, because there's an ashtray up front here alongside that cigarette lighter. And then underneath that, there's this nice little compartment for storage. The seats in the Previa are actually pretty comfortable as well. It's a very nice material. You could get leather in the later year LE, which was very fancy. They're not super supportive, but they offer a nice range of motion, and also I'm just comfortable. I can find a nice position in here. Both the front seats have armrests that are adjustable in every single way possible. Up top you have a manually dimming rearview mirror, and there's also a clock with a dome light as well. LE versions of the Previa, and I think you could option this on a DX. I think it was an $1,800 option. You could get the dual moonroofs, which had one up here, which just popped, and then the one for the rear passengers actually slid open. And when I was younger, I read that you could get a cooler in your Previa as well. This really was the ultimate Toyota family van. That's crazy. That's crazy. It's really planted. And that, my friends, was a chilly but in-depth look at Toyota's 90s egg. Thanks to Julian for letting us look at his own egg today. It's definitely knocked off something from my bucket list, but now I'm looking for an old Toyota van and a Sienna, but that's a whole other topic that I could ramble about. I appreciate you all for watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing, and thanks for stopping by, and I'll see you again soon. Bye, peeps.